Well, we're continuing our sermon series looking at the characteristics of who we are as a church. I know it's been a little disjointed, like we've been doing it every fortnight at the moment because we've had other services in between. But if you remember, if we can go back 4 weeks ago, I was quoted a bloke called Rabbi Ed Freeman, who's basically said, if we're going to be a church that is influential, we need to understand who we are and be driven by those core values. And so we've been looking, well, what are our core values? And so far we've looked at 2 of them. So 4 weeks ago we said we are a community who worships, we are Jesus-centred, and we worship God in all that we do, not just on a Sunday morning, but in all that we do. We are worshippers. And 2 weeks ago on Anzac Day, we looked at that we have a heart for serving. We are a community of volunteers who offer to help others and to serve others in the same way that Jesus served us. And so today I'm looking at a third one of these values. We have many values that drive us, but this is the third one I want to look at today, is that we've got a heart for caring. We're a community who loves and cares for one another and those around us. And Paul in our Bible reading today gives us such a succinct explanation of why we should be that sort of a community, why we should be a community that loves. In the first part of that second letter to the Corinthians, the church in Corinth was very special to Paul. He had started the church, planted the church in one of his missionary journeys, and had been back in numerous times since. He loved the church and wanted the best for them. And so he starts his letter with this amazing line that says, "Praise be to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort that we receive from God." Isn't that a great sentence? But the bit I like about it is that it starts off by saying, God first loved us, God first cares for us, God first comforted us. That's what we celebrate, that's what we worship. But in doing so, we are then able to share that same love, that same care, that same compassion to other people. We can almost say, with the compassion and care given to us, that's how we care for other people. It's almost like John when John says, we love because God first loved us. Paul's saying we care because God first cared for us. And, 2 weeks ago in the serving one, I said Jesus set an example for us to follow. I would say that Jesus set an example for us to follow in this as well. If you just read the Gospels, it's just full of stories of Jesus. It says his heart was full of compassion and he reached out and helped. This is who Jesus was. He set the example for us to follow when it comes to being compassionate. So being a church that has a heart for caring, being a church that is compassionate, should be a value that shapes our decision-making, that shapes all that we do. Now, I could actually go on and finish this sermon by giving you verse after verse, story after story out of the Bible to prove my point. But do I need to prove it? Are we all agreeing that this is the sort of church that we need to be? I think so. I just didn't feel the need that I had to go on, but I could, because there is lots in the Bible that the Bible says about this, how it's part of who we are as disciples of Jesus. It's who we are in response to what God has done for us. We don't need to be convinced to be a church that is caring and compassionate. So instead, for the last 10 minutes or so, I just wanted to give you 3 different thoughts or perspectives on this topic that might, I hope that God might speak through some different ways of exploring this idea of being a caring and compassionate church. Or even better, that God might challenge us to respond in a certain way to being a caring and compassionate church. And I also acknowledge that I do talk about this a little bit in groups, so if you've heard one of these 3 before, I apologise, but I'm sure that you probably have heard me say these things before. So the first idea or thought, no, that was my last slide. Here it is. The first idea or thought that I wanted just to reflect upon today is this idea that feeling cared for and loved changes your view on everything. Now, you may have heard me say this before, that there's some research that has been done that they had a church that has amazingly grateful, engaging worship services. You know, if you just score them just on their worship, you'd give them a 9 out of 10. But then they found that if people were sitting in the congregation who didn't feel loved or cared for and asked them what they scored them, they would score them a 5 out of 10. They also found churches that did an okay service, but it wasn't anything spectacular. You know, it was just a stock standard run-of-the-mill worship service. But if people in the congregation felt loved and cared for, they would say, oh, it's an 8 out of 10 worship, it's fantastic. The way that we feel loved and cared for changes our perspective on everything. It's not only in worship, you could do the same thing with youth groups. Kids think youth groups are great if they feel loved and cared for, not necessarily the program. Bible studies. You can have a fantastic Bible study, but if people don't feel loved and cared for, they don't think it's a good Bible study. Now, I want to add that yes, good planning and creativity and passion, that's all important. I think it's good to make things the highest quality that we can do. But I must confess that I fall in the trap of thinking that that is the most important thing. It's not. The most important thing is that people feel loved and cared for. And if we're getting that right, then we can put the extra effort into making our worship services, our youth groups or whatever, the best that they can be. It's a little bit like Paul when he said, you know, I can say all the right words, but without love, I'm just a clanging gong. You know, we got to get the love and the care and the compassion right first. The second thought that I just want to throw out there is more of a question. Why do, in the same place or the same experiences, some people feel loved and cared for, and yet another person having the same experience and the same place, time, does feel unloved and alone? In my last church, I remember having a conversation where these people were saying, oh, you know, this church is the most friendliest church I've ever been to. You know, they're just wonderful. I've been cared for so much. It's just been great. And the next person I said, oh, this church has a real problem with caring. You know, I've been here for ages and I'm struggling to, connect with anybody. You know, it's not friendly at all. How can that be? You know, how can it be the same place, talking to the same people, having the same programs, and yet two vastly different experiences? This is a complex question, I just want to put up there. This is a complex question, and there is no easy answer. I wish I could just say, well, this is why, and solve it. But it's not an easy answer. I think there's a lot of things to do with this, that why people have different experiences of the same event or the same group of people. And I don't think it's a matter of just saying, oh, we just need to do more or care more or love more or run more programs and that will solve it. I don't think that's the answer. As I said, I think, well, take this church. We've got an amazing pastoral care team that's doing a phenomenal job. We've got good programs that do reach out and help people, and yet, I'm still hearing some of those comments here as well. So I don't think it is just the program or the people. It is a complex question. I did read something that I thought was interesting when it came to trying to explore some ways of understanding this. And I've got a puzzle on the screen, which I have used here before, but it was in about my third sermon ever here. And so, yeah, you won't remember that. It's been 3 years now, and that's the time that people forget sermons, after 3 years. So here is a thing on the screen. Have a quick look at that. How many F's are in the sentence? Just count them up. Don't yell them out yet, just count them up. Keep them in your head. How many F's are in the sentence? Got that up the back? You've counted them all? Yep. So, who thinks that there is one F, two Fs, three Fs, four Fs, five Fs, six Fs, seven Fs, eight Fs? Notice there's different answers. How could that be? It's the same sentence. You're all looking at the same thing. Why is there different answers? I didn't check on mine to see what the answers the people gave there. But how many Fs are on the screen? Well, let me tell you, there are three obvious Fs. Can you see them? Finished, files, and scientific are all the obvious Fs. You all got those because nobody said less than three. But there's more Fs. Can you see them? There are three more Fs. There are six in total. The ofs are there. There are three ofs. How do we miss them? I think this sometimes happens in churches. Churches can be caring people who are looking out for people in need, who are reaching out, who are helping. But sometimes we miss stuff. We're not perfect. And for the person who is the of, they feel like, oh, this church doesn't care for me at all. You know, they're caring for the finished files fantastically. I can see them do that. But they're missing me. I want to say it's not because we don't care, but sometimes we miss stuff. To me, that's not the complete answer either. As I said, it's a very complex question, why people have different experiences of communities. But I think that might be part of the answer. And if you're one of those people who feel like that we have missed you, I do apologise. It is one of the worst things when you find out that you've missed something. And if that's ever happened, I do apologise deeply. It is never our intention to, purposely not care. But sometimes it's hard. And, I could give excuses and say, well, we need to know, please tell us. Or I could also give excuses that we're all busy and so that's sometimes why we miss. Or I could give excuses and never tell me something on a Sunday because I always forget it. But they're just excuses. And when it comes to caring and compassion, excuses don't cut it. So I do apologise if that's been the case. But I also want to encourage us to say, let's look out for the Fs. And there are people who do see those ofs. There are some people who put up their hands for the sixes. If you are those sort of people in the past, in this caring sort of environment who do see the needs, please tell us who don't quite see the needs either. Because I'm probably one of the people who only see the obvious ones. That's part of my personality. Anyway, as I said, it's not the easiest question to answer, but I'm going to segue into my third point instead, which says, this was the point I wanted to make on the last one. If we want to be a church that has a core value of caring and compassion, we want everybody to be wrapped up in our arms of love. That's what our goal is. So we just have to find ways of making sure that we're doing the best as we possibly can in that. But that segues to my third one, which is how do we constantly be a caring community or nurture a caring culture right across our church community. In my last church, I was told about a conversation. You notice how I'm always using examples of my last church? So much easier to do that on this topic than talk about this church because we can look at it from a distance. But let me tell you, most of these examples are also here as well. But in my last church, I did have this conversation with two members. I heard about a conversation that two members of my church had. They passed it on to me. One was disappointed that the church had not visited her in her time of need during her recent illness. One lady was, the other lady she was talking to replied, but I came and saw you, and didn't Win come around too, and didn't Dawn drop a casserole? And her response was, well, yeah, you're my friends. I'm talking about the church. All of these people are from the church. And I want to make this clear. There is no group of people running around with red shirts that says the church who are here to serve us. We are those people. We are the church. And so whilst there are people who have a calling to do this, like myself and those people in the ministry team, but also people like the pastoral care team, and there's other individuals within this community who feel that this is what God's calling them to do, to be, reaching out and caring for people. The reality is that we are all encouraged to do this. Jesus said the command to love one another. He didn't say that to a specific group of people. He said that to all his followers. He said, this is how they will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. It's something that we're all to do. Eugene Peterson, in his book 5 Smooth Stones for Pastoral Work, which is an excellent book if you wanted to read more about this topic, says that sometimes we have got too narrow of a definition of what it means to be caring and compassionate. He sometimes says that sometimes we get locked into thinking that being caring and compassionate is sitting beside somebody who's dying, or dropping off a casserole to somebody who is unwell. But he said, no, being caring and compassionate is a huge thing that we are all called to participate in. And if you don't think you can sit next to somebody who is dying, that doesn't mean that you can't be caring and compassionate. You can't participate in this. He said in his book, people feel cared for, and I love this line, people feel cared for when they are encouraged, included, connected, valued, and affirmed. Would you agree with that? People feel cared for when they are encouraged, included, connected, valued and affirmed. And so he basically said, if you're doing anything that helps people feel encouraged, included, connected, valued and affirmed, you are participating in the caring ministry of the church, of the kingdom of God. I was actually in a small group one time when we were reading this book, and we tried to work out, well, how does this play out in action? How does this play out in what we do? And we came up with 5 different points, just very simple, short points of what this might look like to be a community with a broad definition of what it means to be a caring community. You want to hear these 5 points just to finish with? Excellent, because it's in my sermon. So the first one that they came up with was 5 ways we can show care was encouraging prayer. Encouraging prayer. This is what makes us different from the secular agencies that are also doing the caring ministry. Because there are a whole bunch of people who are doing excellent work right across our community when it comes to caring and support. But one of the big differences with the church is that we pray, that we can offer prayer. And there is a difference between not only praying for people, which I think is good, but praying with people, which I also think is good. But there is a difference. Can you see the subtle difference between the two? I think we're called to do both pray for and to pray with. And I really encourage us to look for those opportunities to pray. I was only just hearing a story this week of somebody who said, they were talking with somebody and suddenly thought, they probably don't want me to pray, but I'll ask anyway, and said, do you want me to pray? And they said, yes, please. Yes, please. I think more people would respond with that really positive yes please than they would with no. And if they say no, that's fine. Don't make that uncomfortable or anything. Some people don't want to be prayed for. But I think we should be looking for those opportunities. The next one they came up with, this small group, was to connect our stories. To connect our stories together. Everybody has a story, a reason for why they became who they are. A way to show people that we care for them is to actually take the time to find out their story, to listen to their story. So often, if you're like me, I'm a person who loves to tell my story, that I sometimes want to tell my story before actually hearing your story. And I have to remind myself, no, to show you that you are valued, encouraged and affirmed, I need to hear your story. Maybe you want to hear my story as well. And if you do, that's great, because I love telling my story. But I want to hear your stories as well. And then we can begin to connect our stories together and to connect our stories to the gospel story, to God's story, and see how this all fits together. So maybe one way of being caring is simply inviting people around for a meal and asking them, tell me your story. Wouldn't that be awesome? That we could just invite a few people around for dinner and say, Let's share our stories and see what happens. The third one, pain sharing. And this is probably what we all think when we come to this idea of the caring ministry of the church. Pain sharing is responding with empathy to people's pain, giving immediate support and comfort, and if possible, helping them on the road to healing or peace or resolution. This sort of caring can be hard, and this is why some people think that they're not called to be carers. Because sitting with somebody who's going through a difficult time or journeying with them is hard work. Sometimes we're called to do that. Sitting with someone who's dying is emotional. Sitting with somebody who is desperately in a difficult situation that there's no answer for. That's hard. But we sometimes are called to do that. Sometimes we don't feel like we've got the training or the gifts to do that. We can be helpful at that. If you want to be empowered to do this sort of ministry, I can give you some training or books to read or whatever. But what's most important when it comes to this idea of pain sharing is this idea that it's being there that counts. It's not actually what we do that's most important. It's the fact that we are there, that we are committed to being there with a person who is going through a difficult time. The fourth one that we came up with was community building. Part of making people feel encouraged, including connected, valued, affirmed, is to make sure that we all belong together in this community of faith. And there are some people who are really good at that, who are good at doing things that make people feel like they're part of the community. Whether that's organising big events that we invite people to make them feel like they're part of the community, or whether it's just what happens in that 15 minutes after church to make people feel like that they are included and belong. Some people are really good at that, and I want to say that we want to affirm that as an important part of the caring ministry of the church, is community building. And the last one that they came up with was spirit lifting, that sometimes we just need to remember that everybody needs to be cared for, not just the people going through difficult times. Everyone needs to be cared for. And one way we can care for all people is to spread the joy of Jesus through encouraging words or just little acts of kindness. Jesus certainly showed that in his own ministry. He just always was that encouraging, including, kind person. So it doesn't matter if you're in the depths of despair or everything's going great for you. If somebody says an encouraging word to you, it's always good. It is always good. Everybody responds to the encouraging word or an act of kindness. And this is one way that we can care for the community and remind people that they are loved and valued. So what do you think of those? The 5 different ways that we can connect and show care to people. Did God speak to you through any of those, or the other 2 points that I made? Did the Spirit stir an idea within you of something that you could be doing, maybe this week or over the next few weeks, of something you can do to be showing care and compassion? If caring and compassion is a core value of this church, which I believe that it always has been and will continue to be a core value of our church, then let's make sure that everyone connected to our church and that everyone who crosses our path continues to feel encouraged, included, connected, valued, and affirmed. Now that's a goal worth striving for, isn't it? Amen.